So we're right on time. Like we wanted to start at 9:30, so I think we are right on time. So this session, as you know, is very relevant now. Crop issues and trying to find out sustainable development in a turbulent time. So in uncertain time, we know that like before COVID-19, things were quite different. With COVID-19, I think we have seen different kinds of shock. Started with health shock and then transmitted to a vaccine economy and social shock. And then there was attempt to recover, and then we are in a different area now with Ukraine war and then hyperinflation, interest rates, and then on the exchange rate and BOP problems. So it has transmitted into different kinds of shock, and the market agencies, the experts, and others are trying to find out solutions to this shock and then trying to build resilience because shock will come again, and then how to take lessons from these shocks and then prepare for the next shock is also very important lesson that we need to understand and also we need to try to prepare that. So with that, we have like as Professor Samsul, Honorable Minister of State, Mr. Planning, Bangladesh, as our chief guest. We're thankful to him. And we have very distinguished panelists, Dr. Hassan Mansoor, Executive Director, Policy Research Institute, Bangladesh. Then we have Dr. Hossein Dilur Rahman, Executive Chairman, Power and Participation Center, Participation Center, sorry, PPRC. And we have Professor Dilur Rahman, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue, and then finally we have Dr. Zahid Hossain, economist, and he has been with World Bank before retiring to our different. He's more comfortable as economist, right? Okay. That I heard from our young RS. So with that, we will start with the trigger presentation, and I will request Dr. Selim to present his presentation, but I also request our panelists to be to complete or deliver whatever they have to say with 7 or 8 minutes, because then we want to also have opportunity to ask questions from the audience.
Thank you, Professor Bozlok Khandokar. And I again thank the very distinguished panelists and especially our Honorable State Minister, Professor Shamsul Alam, to be with us. So this presentation, as I said, is a trigger presentation. It's not really going to be a full-blown presentation covering all the details. My idea is to just trigger the discussion in this panel discussion to listen from the very distinguished panelist here. So I will just look at what is the kind of nature of the turbulent time, what we have. We have massive supply side shocks, and probably these supply side shocks, when you talk about the supply side shocks, we can talk about the nature, length, and depth of the shocks. And we know that there is a lot of uncertainty now how long this shock will continue. I'm referring to the kind of last year Russia-Ukraine war and the resultant global supply side challenges. And we are seeing there are 3 sets of problems which actually emerge out of this turbulent time or these shocks. One is, of course, a macroeconomic crisis, falling GDP growth rate, and the kind of obstruction of recovery from the COVID, because many countries actually started recovering from COVID. Then we have this supply side shock. And in this presentation, I'll be focusing mainly on Bangladesh, but I'm quite sure that some of the analysis would be or discussion would be relevant to other developing countries and especially from South Asia as well. Huge inflationary pressure, balance of payment problem, and of course increased debt burden. And we are seeing this kind of macroeconomic, and there are many other aspects too, but I'm highlighting these 4 very important issues. Then also on the social impact, because these are also being carried out from the COVID impact. We had impact on poverty, we have an impact on inequality and labor market, and then we also have problems in terms of achieving larger development goals. It's not only this social impact, because we also have gender equality, we also have various others. If I refer to the Sustainable Development Goals, we're also having serious challenges now, whether by 2030, countries like Bangladesh should be able to achieve an important part of the Sustainable Development Goals. But what I'm mentioning here, the macroeconomic crisis, especially these are kind of visible because we have good data of this crisis and some of the impacts. And we can know that, we can track what is happening in different areas. But when it comes to social impact and when it comes to impact on larger development goals, I call them it's very kind of invisible. We don't know because we don't have regular surveys. We don't have updates on poverty, inequality, or on the impact on labor market. And then, of course, various aspects of the larger development goals. So that's what I call them invisible. And probably we talk based on some very small kind of surveys, or maybe there are some surveys which have happened, but even nationwide, but which have not been endorsed officially. So I think these challenges are there. And then the effects of the shock depend on the resilience of the economy. And that is the kind of very much at the core of our conference theme of how to build the resilience. Now, what do we mean by economic resilience? So there are three aspects of economic resilience: recovery, the ability to recover quickly from a shock, withstand, the ability to withstand the shock, and avoid, the ability to avoid the shock altogether. Probably we are not really talking about the third part because in no way is I think it's possible to avoid the shock. Probably we are talking more on the first two aspects, the recovery and the withstand, and how we can build the resilience of the economy to actually recover from a shock, quickly from a shock, and ability to withstand a shock. Now, how do we build economic resilience? So there are four aspects of it. One is that we need to have broad-based economic growth. The economic growth should not be based on a narrow basis. So we need to see whether the economic growth, what is happening, is broad-based. Proper macroeconomic management. There are many issues like revenue mobilization, maintaining budget deficit, financial sector, balance of payment, etc. Strengthening the social sector, especially I'm focusing on health and education, and then of course, strengthening institutions. Now, if you look at the economic growth, and now I'm coming to the experience of Bangladesh, the economic growth performance of Bangladesh is definitely encouraging. The way the country managed to grow and decade after decade, adding 1 percentage point to the overall GDP growth rate. And that is definitely praiseworthy. But questions remain on the drivers of growth, especially ready-made garments and remittances have been the major drivers for long, and the quality of growth. In terms of reduction in poverty, inequality, and promoting employment, what I call PIE, P-I-E, poverty, inequality, and employment, what is happening to PIE? And in fact, we are seeing that there are serious issues. The way growth story is there, very strong growth story, but in terms of reduction in poverty, in terms of reduction in inequality, in fact, we did not see much reduction in inequality increased. In terms of generating employment, not much success is there. So I think that is a big challenge. And during this crisis, I think this challenge actually intensified. But again, as I said, that this part remained invisible because of the lack of data and because of the kind of creating evidence which is being endorsed by the government. So challenge of finding new drivers of growth in Bangladesh. So I would say there are potentials of special economic zones and mega infrastructural projects. Definitely it's there and huge investments are happening there. However, much of these potentials depend on the timely and cost-effective implementation. And there remains a big challenge, and we know that if we delay the whole process of the implementation and cost become escalated by few times, then the real return from those projects become kind of infeasible. Then there are challenges of economic and export diversification. And definitely, as I said, we need a broad-based industrial policy. I'll not really get into the discussion of the industrial policy much, but what my argument is that our industrial policy, in whatever be the form, or the incentive structure is very narrow focused, narrow based, it's not really broad based. So let's look at some kind of data, especially Bangladesh export concentration is very high. We know that. But when you compare Bangladesh with the average LDCs, the group still Bangladesh belong to, or lower middle income countries, you can compare Bangladesh with those country groups and you can see that Bangladesh's export diversity is exceedingly high. export concentration, exposure is exceedingly high, even compared to the South Asian average or upper middle income country, where the country wants to become an upper middle income country by 2031. And Bangladesh appears the major outlier in ready-made garments. I just tried to plot in two axes. One is the manufacturing value added as a percent of GDP. That is, what is the share of manufacturing in GDP? And on the y-axis is the textile and clothing or ready-made garments share in the manufacturing. So as countries, actually, as you can see, as countries increase their manufacturing share in GDP, they moved away from the ready-made garments. But Bangladesh, you can see the red block point is an outlier. It's still very, very high at a kind of lower level of manufacturing value added share in GDP. So now coming to the macroeconomic management, until the onset of the crisis, Bangladesh was successful in terms of managing budget deficit, current account deficit, inflationary pressure, exchange rate stability, and growing foreign reserve. But despite the macroeconomic success, the country is confronting several long-standing challenges undermining resilience. We have very low tax GDP ratio. If I show you this tax GDP, the graph, actually I have plotted here. In the x-axis is the early 2000s. That means around 2001, 2002. And then the y-axis is the late 2010s. That means around 2020. So I have plotted countries for the data for 128 countries. Now you can see the Bangladesh in 2001 was a very low among those all countries, still had a very low level of tax GDP ratio. And even in 2020 was the lowest. So whereas other countries, they moved on, they increased. Many of the countries, they actually were able to increase the tax GDP ratio where Bangladesh was not able to. That's a big issue, I would say, that hurting our resilience. We have high degree of non-performing loans and weak governance in the banking sector. We'll be listening from the panelists on all these issues. Low level of foreign direct investment, misalignment of exchange rate, and we had this until the recent adjustment, but still there are issues of the exchange rate. Multiple exchange rates are there, and hurting export promotion, export diversification. A large amount of illicit outward transfer of money, and this is related to hundi business, and this is related to, and that is also helping or assisting unofficial flow of remittances, and which is not really adding to our foreign reserves. So we also like to hear from the panelists on this, and high amount of subsidies in the annual budget and inefficiency in budget implementation. I mentioned the inefficiency. The reason is if you look at the budget implementation rate, around 75 to 77% for the last one decade. If you compare the proposed budget with the actual budget implementation. Now, in the social sector, there are significant improvements in child and maternal mortality, life expectancy, gross school enrollment, and gender parity in primary education. Bangladesh has been cited as a success story, and we feel proud of that. But questions remain on the quality of education and healthcare to confront the emerging challenges. I think the big question is, are we doing enough for reaping the benefits of demographic dividend? And especially, I raised the issue of what I call the policy paralysis related to public spending on education and health sector. I just want to quickly show you two graphs. Again, if you look at the public expenditure on education as a percent of GDP, and again, the comparison is what was Bangladesh spending in 2001 and what was Bangladesh and other countries spending in 2020. And out of 158 countries, Bangladesh appears as the lowest. In last 20 years, no change in the public expenditure on education, no major change. It's around 2% of GDP. And even if you look at the health, same story appears. Very low spending, public spending on health education. And with this very low public spending on health and education, it's very difficult to reap the benefits of demographic dividend. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the challenge of poverty, inequality, employment, they are acute, and they become, I suppose that they became acute in the COVID period and in the crisis period. We did some survey from SANEM, PPRC, BIGD, they also did some surveys, and the surveys actually came out with the very common findings that during COVID, there was a rise in poverty rate, rise in employment, labor market distortion, and also while there was a kind of recovery, but again, this macroeconomic crisis made the situation worse. So I'm very much towards the end of my presentation. If I look at the institutions now, there are weak formal institutions, especially when you look at the bureaucracy quality, control of corruption, rule of law, enforcement of property rights, etc. These are under question. And there are dominance of informal institutions and dominance of deals over rules. So we have a lot of research from SANEM, and I will really encourage you, those who are interested to know about the research on institutions of political economy by SANEM's researchers, please engage with us. during the breaks or over the next 2 days. We'll be very happy to share with you those are our ideas. But very briefly, what the idea is that the countries like Bangladesh, here rules they don't really, they don't dominate. It's the deals making. How the bureaucrats and the business, our state business, they actually come to an agreement. And we have a very interesting session tomorrow on the state business relationship. So the whole idea of Bangladesh paradox, what the idea is that the whole idea of Bangladesh paradox was the development even under weak formal institutions. I don't think that that's very much helpful in building the resilience of the economy. And we need to actually get out of that Bangladesh paradox story. Yeah, so that's something that argument what we'll be talking for the next 2 days. There is, however, a consensus on the need for reforming critical economic domains like taxation, financial sector, budget management, export diversification, trade policy, etc. Reforming critical social domains like health, education, social safety net, labor market, etc. And as I said, there is a consensus. Why? Because if you look at the 5-year plans of the government, the government also endorses the need for these reforms. Even in the 6, 7, 8, 5-year plans, many of the discussions of reforms have been highlighted. And Professor Shamsul Alam would be, I think, he was very instrumental in, getting out these 5-year plans. So I'm quite sure he'll be also sharing with us the ideas. But then why is there little progress? This is my last slide. Because what I said that is unclear about reform objectives and reform results. Reform hurts some groups, so we see the resistance. And there's an adjustment cost of reform. Who bears the adjustment cost and by what magnitude? So the problem is, in many cases, it's very easy to actually pass the burden on the people, especially by increasing the prices of many utilities or increasing the taxes. But the whole issue is whether the richer section of the society, whether they also bear the cost of adjustment. So ongoing reform discussion under the IMF loan, I would say that is a stitch in time saves 9. But actually, we have a lot of pending reforms, which we did not do. Now we have a lot of things which are now on the table. And probably in a very short time, we have to do a lot of things. And we also would like to hear from our panelists and, of course, Professor Shamsul Alam, what is the kind of discussion within the government, how to address these reforms. My final piece, alignment of actors in terms of influence and interest. Because we have actors with high interest for reform, but they have very little influence. Probably I myself belong to that category. I have high interest for reform, but I have very little influence. But we have actors with high influence, but they have very little interest. So we need to have an alignment of the actors who have high interest and high influence. Thank you very much for your very kind attention.
Thank you, Selim, for an excellent legal presentation. I think we raised a lot of issues and also issues for our panelists. I think I have jotted down 4 areas for our panelists, but you don't need to be confined to this areas. Okay, so I will start with Dr. Hassan Mansoor, who has been, I think, writing and discussing almost every day in our media, electronic media and print media on macroeconomic issues and what are the challenges we have and what solution we can actually we can take. And I mean, these are, although maybe we will be focusing on Bangladesh, but I think this will be more like relevant for all the South Asian countries. So my question to Dr. Hassan Mansoor is that, what strategies you suggest that government can adopt to restore macroeconomic stability at the pre-COVID-19 level? Right.
Thank you, and good morning to you all. Thank you for staying, organizing this time of the event. Let me a little bit go back to the time. We need to ask us one question that is this crisis completely unanticipated, or it was in the making? We need to explore 1 minute of that. And basically, if I just 2, 3 indicators, so we can say that it was in the making. It didn't just overwhelm us in 1 day or 1 night because of one war and everything. In the sense that we could, our tax to GDP ratio, for example, what Selim has said, has been falling for many years. And we all are aware that something has to be done, but not done. Secondly, we were always talking about the fixity of the exchange rate for several years, and it was not attended. And so that is one another issue and some of the part of the policy. Yes. Third is this surge in import that happened in more recent time. It was also in the making. I mean, you should have much more closer monitoring mechanism to know that LCs have surged, and we know they should know that this foreign exchange reserves is steadily falling. So this combination it could be very combustible. So there was a lapse of, I would say, close monitoring of the developments, which could have helped us prepare better little earlier, even few months earlier would be times of SAEC situation we could have had. So these are all important areas that we fail to. It's not the detection was there, but to act on those. Second thing that I would say, now that we have this situation, we have to be cognizant of the fact that what takes long time to make is also takes some time to undo. It's not going to be undone in just like that. So it will take a little time. For example, on the dollar crisis situation, shortage of dollar in the economy, it's a persistent problem for the last 6 months. So we have heard that it will go away in October, then October came, it's gone, and it will be settled in January, it's gone. Now it's probably March sometime, but it will be gone. So the issue is that why is it lingering? We know that there are some positive news also. Our exports are doing reasonably well. It's growing at about 10% rate, which is under the circumstances a good performance. Our remittance initially was lackluster, was not doing well, and there was a lot of suspicion that money is being transferred out, and that's why the flow was not as expected. But the last month, it has at least come back to close to the $2 billion mark, which we consider as an absolute minimum for us to balance the balance. So that is, if you can sustain that 2 billion or increase it a little bit more, that should help in that process. But current account improvement alone is not going to solve the problem in the immediate term, because the problem is also in the payment side. There are a lot of accumulated, what you call unsettled LCs, which needs to be settled. The magnitude we don't know, but it will be several billion. So that has to be that over in that and not in distant period in the next few months. So this will keep on pressure on us. Secondly, the financial account, which used to be a good source of our surplus funding, is not below the current account level, and used to help us generate reserves as well as fund imports. That financial account, which used to be 13.7 billion last year, 14 billion the year before, has turned negative, and it's getting more negative now. So last month it was 100 million, now it is 1 billion. And it's probably the challenge will be there. Challenge will be there. How do you build up the confidence of our financial partners across the globe who used to finance Bangladesh's import and exports? How are you going to assure them that we are a good client while we have still outstanding stock of unpaid bills? So that's the challenge. We can pay, and as long as we can not only pay on time and assure them that in future we'll never be missing it again, this flow is going to shine. So that's a sizable amount that we need from the international community on a steady basis. Every country gets it. It's not that Bangladesh is unique in that regard or it is a special vulnerability. No, it's not a special vulnerability. We are living in a globalized world. We are living in, even though we are not capital account open, but capital comes. Capital comes to finance our activities, short-term, medium-term, and trade-related issues. So we have to get that financing, keep our ball. So essentially what I'm saying, is that we have to build up confidence in that front to get this dollar crisis, to overcome the dollar crisis over time. So that is an area that requires much more work, because we are still going to see negative numbers and greater negative numbers in the coming months, most likely, in the financial market. And that has to turn around, become positive, and then become a significantly positive number to bring us the kind of, bringing us all to be comfortable, congested and suffocating for the job. So that's the dollar part of it. The good part also is that government has gone to the IMF and gone on time, ahead of time, I would say, compared to most countries, and has sorted out the issues very, very promptly. And I mean, I was surprised that in one visit they could conclude and go to the board and issue the staff report and disburse the money. That's pretty, I would say, very fast track. Probably fast track because the Bangladesh didn't go for this kind of support for a long time, and they wanted to show that for a good time asking for help, they are very prompt in helping them. So both sides were working together in that dimension. What I would basically suggest, I was reading the staff report last night. It has certain conditions, of course, but not fully specified at this point, and it will become. It has financial sector reform issues. It has tax reform issues. It has tax expenditure rationalization issues. It has many of those issues that we talk about are all there. It also puts a floor on the reserve level, and it expects the reserve level, which your definition will be, to go up in the next June. So that's a challenge I'm facing. That's a performance category. That we have to beat, keep the program on track. So I think, I hope that even though we have missed a lot of signals, we can now put it together and try to at least observe the conditions that are embedded in the reforms that are embedded in the IMF program, and help us get out of this situation. Of course, it may not be sufficient. We may have to do more, maybe more accelerated one, but that is only determined over time. And I'm sure, as the program is reviewed by the government and the IMF and others, they will make the necessary adjustments to put it on track and get Bangladesh out of trouble. So I wish the best for our whole economy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We also need that best for Bangladesh economy, but I now turn to Dr. Hossein Dilur Rahman, who has been doing a lot of research on social area, and in particular during COVID-19, PITGS, PPRC, some studies, some rapid estimates, trying to understand the vulnerability of different groups in Bangladesh. With that focus, I request Dr. Hossein Dilur Rahman to, if you can give some idea of how to increase resilience of vulnerable people in Bangladesh. Please.
Thank you, and congratulations to Sanem for the conference in person after a COVID break. I'll try to keep within the signaling space of the title of the conference, resilience to shocks, because Bangladesh has many structural problems. We can spend a lot of time discussing those structural problems, but there is a particular context in front of us, which is shocks and how we are trying to build resilience to that. So I'll try to keep my comments within that space. The shock has been to the macroeconomy. Hassan Mansoor actually explained that, the types and what we are doing to that. But the shock also has been to other realities, particularly say poverty realities. PPRC and BIGD did 5 rounds of panel surveys during this time. SANEM also did, and CPD also did. And all of them have come out with similar, even government later. Initially, they were not so prompt with their service, but they also did some service. And I think some broad trends were very clear, because the shock also has been not just on the numbers, not just on the poverty numbers, which have gone up significantly. Various estimates have been given, but at the end of the day, significantly the numbers have gone up. That's one conclusion that one can draw. But I think this time, the additional feature to take into account is not just about the numbers, but about also the underlying dynamics. For example, newer types of groups have now fallen prey to these problems of poverty. For example, lower middle class, even middle class households are now facing types of problems which they were not facing before. So one is a question of numbers, the other is a question of newer groups, and also it has spawned newer types of responses from within society. Now, on that, that's the first point to make, is that the amount of national discussions, particularly by policymakers, which is devoted to resilience for the macro shock, there's no commensurate attention to the shock on the poverty front. So we are trying to really get back our balance and macro fundamentals on track, but the larger impact on society via the poverty process, that does not seem to have garnered adequate attention either of the government or even of the development partners, or even across society at large. So I think this is a point that is worth bearing in mind. But since SANEM has really emphasized the word resilience, and that seems like the brand name for this conference, I think it's important for us to also unpack this word, resilience. What does it mean for an economist conference? How should we understand resilience? And here, yes, resilience in terms of, there was a shock, how do you get back macro fundamentals? That's one part of the resilience. But people are actually not sitting idle, because they cannot sit idle. It's their own lives. So they are building their own resilience under duress, so to say, in their own ways. We need to understand people's resilience also, how they are trying to cope with it. And here, I think sociologists also need to be invited to SANEM conferences next year, perhaps. And perhaps behavioral economists need to be invited, because we need the certain behavioral responses to such shocks is really worth studying. It's a very distinctive feature of Bangladesh, people of Bangladesh's attitude, is that we are very prone to agreeing to adjust to all types of situations. So adjusting seems to be one of our behavioral sort of mode, always trying to adjust, not necessarily to our benefit all the time. They're also risk takers, even in this situation. I've seen people who, PPRC BIGD surveys brought out a phenomena, we call it reverse migration. People found it difficult to live in the cities because of rising expenditure. Some of them have gone back. I was just in an extended field tour in the southwestern part of the country and saw some examples of how this reverse migration is playing out in terms of people's resilience capacity. And it's a worthwhile study area that we need to look at. But I think the distressing part of the people's resilience is that, and that's why the word resilience, which I used to also use with a lot of sense of strength, now I'm a bit more hesitant, because for people, is not so much resilience as resilience burden. Because how they are doing resilience is by intensifying self-exploitation. They're reducing their consumption of nutrition. They're cutting discretionary expenditures which could improve their human capital. They're adjusting to a lower standard of living. This intensified self-exploitation should not be just celebrated as resilience. This is how people are on the ground, away from all these state support realities, how they are building their attempt to survive in a shock situation. And I think that's self-exploitation is already showing that on several SDGs, Bangladesh is in danger of becoming significantly off track. Nutrition is one. Human capital, particularly secondary education, is one. And there may be others where, particularly also women's issues, health and gender-based violence, etc. These are very significantly off track. And when you talk of resilience to shocks, we need to also address these sort of realities. Now, and here I would actually pose raise an important alarm, so to say, because I've been around several fields in the last couple of months. Not just the government, even the NGOs. I'm chair of BRAC, and I've been looking at many BRAC programs. They have also been trying to cope in multiple ways, but through that, what I noted is that the amount of attention we have given to economic recovery due to the shock, we haven't given similar attention to the social recovery part. Now, that has been mentioned by Selim and Bozlu and Bidisha. But I think here the very important issue is that it's not just a question of pumping in a bit more money. There's a more serious problem of a significant, we have talked of healthcare loss, healthcare shock. We have talked of income loss. We have talked of learning loss even. But we haven't really talked about awareness loss. There's a significant underreported, often unreported awareness loss across rural and outside the metropolitan cities. And what this is doing is, two manifestation of this is that women's empowerment type of agenda is becoming more complex, and also getting children back to school, back to a interest in learning, is a serious long-term problem which is going to impact on the human capital future of Bangladesh. I think these are issues that we need to focus, and that's why the shock that we are talking about today, it's a two-tier shock. One is the macro shock, which we are concerned with how to get it fundamentals back, IMF loan, etc., etc. But I think both the COVID and the larger world economic shock has also, I think, brought to the fore the direction of development that Bangladesh is pursuing. Our development journey, the growth journey, needs now to be unpacked. It's, the inequality has been mentioned, but also the potential for middle income trap, the human capital crisis that, not in employment, education or training. NEET indicator apparently has gone up from 29.5% to over 30% now, which is that we are on some of the longer term, even economic parameters, we are actually on the off track. So I'll just end by saying that we need to have this, the idea of shock, we need to take into account of the macro shock, but also on the larger poverty and social shock. And the idea is that we need to also review, in a way, the shock allows us to re-engage at a deeper level of the type of growth journey that we have been making. And I land on one little correction to Selim's last sort of two lines. You mentioned about people with high interest and low influence. You put yourself in that category, perhaps, except Dr. Alam, we are all in that category. And you mentioned people with high influence but low interest. I just want to amend that sentence. Problem of Bangladesh is people with high interest, high influence, have high personal interest. That's why they don't have actual interest in reform. Thank you.
Or different perspective on the resilience, and I now like to turn to Dr. and he has been doing a lot of work on the external sector side. So, I mean, you don't need to be confined to that area, but I think we like to see, I mean, export diversification effort in Bangladesh has failed. I mean, my question is why and what can be done to, I mean, improve export diversification in the case of Bangladesh?
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Badul Khandakar. Dear audience, first of all, let me register my deep appreciation of this opportunity. I am a veteran of SAEC conferences. I think I haven't missed anyone. This is the sixth one.
We don't want to miss you.
So thank you. And always I enjoy participating and being associated with the SAEC conferences. One particular reason being it attracts a lot of young researchers. I think that's very important as our country moves forward, because you will really take Bangladesh forward in the 21st century, and an informed policy making, evidence-based research, all these are very important in order to realize the enormous potentialities that our country has. And I believe that this type of conferences will raise your awareness about issues that matter in Bangladesh going forward, and the solutions that matter in realizing its potential. So thank you for this opportunity. I'll come back to the issue, Mr. Moderator, you have raised with regard to export diversification. But before that, the session is on resilience to shocks, and I think Hassan Bhai and Dr. Zidur Rahman Bhai, they have between them in a very informed and insightful way, they have deciphered the major messages that should come out of this conference. And Zidur Bhai, you have decomposed the resilience part of it. And I would like to focus a bit on the shocks part of it, because the fundamental question as we speak today is whether that shock is originating only from outside. I think this is what we have to assess. And I think that, and I think my two panelists have also alluded to that. I think that the shocks are, if we just say that it is COVID, if we just say that it is Ukraine-Russia war, I think we are not doing justice to the thing. I think that shocks also come through hemorrhages, within the economy. And if we cannot address those, they become shocks. And we have seen what Dr. Hassan Mansoor mentioned about the banking sector. Didn't we know that we are having millions of, hundreds of crores, thousands of crores of taka being siphoned off the banking system, the non-performing loans the whitewashing of our actual state of the banks by redefining what is bad loan, by rescheduling, by writing off, by recapitalization of the banks. Didn't we know that? Isn't it going on for many years? When this government came, the bad loan was 22,000 crore taka. As we speak now, today, it is 134,000 crore taka, even after all those, massaging of the NPL figures. So that is also shock. It is also shock that we are not being able to tax those who have to pay the tax. Direct taxation, is one of the very few countries where the direct taxation is on about 1/3 of the total. Even in South Asia, it is 50%. So didn't we know that we need domestic resource mobilization? Dr. Shamsul Alam has the distinction of formulating 3 5-year plans, 2 perspective plans. I was fortunate to be associated with 4 of them. We know, and he also knows. In the 7 5-year plan in 2020, the objective which was set is to take the revenue GDP ratio to 14% from then 10%. 14%. If you take that it is currently 9%, then all the fiscal deficit, 5% of the GDP, there wouldn't have been any fiscal deficit if that 14% we could achieve. Why? I think there the political economy comes, because we are not being able to really get hold of those which the Selim has categorized from a political perspective. Those who have reforms, they don't have interest. And I think I would agree with the they have personal interest. So I think that shocks come also from within the system. And whether we will be able to withstand the outside shocks will critically depend on whether we are ready by addressing the internal shocks. So if there is a storm and your foundation of your house is good, you will be able to withstand that. If it is not, that outside shock can blow away your house. So I think that's where our going forward, our attention will have to be. I fully agree with one of the hypotheses of Professor Wailuddin Mahmood when he said that the surplus that we had made in terms of reforms and institutions in the 1990s, these are being exhausted. No. So we need new generation of institutions, institutional capacities, institutional efficacy, reforms in order to address the second generation of challenges. When this government came, the GDP was only $102 billion. As we speak now, it is $440 billion. So obviously, our success and successive, years of good economic performance, they have put us before new challenges of good governance, challenges of institutional efficacy. I think that there we are facing a lot of problems. Outside shocks will be there. In 1997, there was East Asian crisis. In 2006-07, there were this global economic crisis. Now we have this, the Ukraine and the COVID crisis. So outside crisis will be there. But whether we are building the economic resilience, that is the issue. And there, I think that there are a lot of things to do that. We will have mentioned one word in passing, middle income trap. We have seen many countries which have registered economic growth for many years and then fallen into middle income crisis and middle income trap. So we don't want our country to be like that. We want to take flanking strategies. in order to not to fall into middle income trap. And that also brings me to the current balance of payment position. One issue which I mentioned with regard to, for example, financial account. I saw the July-December figure. Last fiscal year, it was plus $6.8 billion. This year, for the first 6 months, it is $1.1 billion, which is minor. So almost a difference of $8 billion. So obviously, there are many areas where we will have to build on our strengths and also address the emerging challenges. And that brings to the issue of export diversification. With regard to export diversification, I would like to mention that when we talk about export diversification, we always think in terms of diversification away from the ready-made garments. But I think that there are enormous opportunities within the ready-made garments to diversify, intra-R&D diversification. Now, if you look at Bangladesh export composition of the ready-made garments, 75% of it is cotton mills. If you look at the global market, 75% of it is man-made fibers. So I think within the ready-made garments also, there are a lot of opportunities for diversification. And we have to focus on that because that's one area where we have already proved our comparative advantages can be translated into competitive advantages in the global market. We have already proven that. And it's a market of $700 billion. Our export last year was $42 billion, 6%. Enormous opportunity in this market. So I think that that's what we should concentrate. The second is, we always talk about gross export. What we should focus on is net export. The domestic value addition. If we can strengthen our backward linkage and forward linkage, I think we can retain more. So it's just not, the gross $42 billion. This is what is the foreign exchange that we can retain because we also have to import a lot. So I think that there are a lot of other opportunities in the ready-made garments. But at the same time, obviously, we will have to, I think pharmaceuticals is a major area, light engineering is a major area. Bangladesh is one of the world's now, I think, second in terms of business process outsourcing. We don't have those figures. But if you look at from the mirror data from the importing side, you can see what is happening. So if we can make the internet and the speed, the pricing friendly for these young people who are getting into those and also retain value because there are a lot of intermediaries in that market also. So services export is also another area. And now it's like, you cannot really bifurcate goods and services. The goods and services are now entwined. If you want to be competitive, you will have to be competitive both on the services side and the goods side because you are exporting goods, but financing, banking sector, insurance, transport, all these services will determine your final competitiveness. So I think this is also very important. The last point that I will say, I was looking at the Bangladesh Bank projections, and it was mentioned that the import this year, obviously, I mentioned that the balance of payment will improve because we are trying to curtail our imports significantly. And I saw that the projection is minus 9% July-June this fiscal year. And till December, it is minus 2%. This would mean that over the next 6 months, the imports projection will be about minus 16%. Now, with that type of import, what implications it will have on growth rates? Because even if you are curtailing imports of consumption, that is related to aggregate demand. And so it will have adverse implications for growth as well. So my last point is that, as I was mentioned, it's a $440 billion economy. It's very complex. as economists, we know that, that there are important trade-offs. If you want to control interest rate, if you want to control your exchange rate, if you want to control your inflation rate, there are important trade-offs. Sometimes in economics, it's called impossible trinity. You cannot address all three at the same time. So where those trade-offs will be? And there, I think this type of conference, their evidence-based research is so important. And their appreciation of that from policymakers, that when you are telling something critical of the policy, you are not anti-nationalist, you are not anti-patriotic, you are not going against the interest of any party, or you are serving the interest of any party. I think that is also very important. So I think that young researchers who are here, they will not be afraid to come out with evidence-based research results and say that this is what has to be done. I think that is what patriotism actually is. Thank you.
I think now I've gone to Light Person for the last the panelist. Light, I mean, like your view in terms of what is your view in figure of and the little but I think in the process we can also try to assess briefly the economic growth in Bangladesh from broad base and also inclusivity perspective, with very low female levels of participation and high youth unemployment.
Thank you, Dr. Let me first, before I'll follow Mustafi's model, I'll try to address your question at the end, because I want to draw the attention of the audience to two issues that have been mentioned in Salim's presentation. The first is, I would like to add an item on your slide 2, where you list a set of visible and invisible problems. And in your list of invisible problems, I think I would like to see the unintended consequences of policy as another set of problems, which we don't really get to see. To give you just one example, I mean, in order to save diesel, we reduce the production of electricity. That leads to load shedding. That turns on the generator. That increases the demand for diesel. So on balance, through these measures, are we increasing or decreasing the, I mean, this is the boomerang effect of unintended consequence. The other type of unintended consequence is the collateral damages that certain policies have, which, for instance, Mr. Pitt was mentioning that when you put administrative controls on imports, the first question is that really reducing the demand for imports? And second, let's assume it does, then is that decline in import hurting elsewhere in the economy? Mr. mentioned, what is the impact on growth? That we need to account for when we talk about the invisible problems. The second issue that I want to draw your attention to is you mentioned about the existence of a consensus on policies. And I want to unpack that a little bit, that where do we have consensus and where do we not have consensus? I think on the causation of the crisis, the sources of crisis, there's probably a general consensus that it was externally driven, but as Mr. Pitt mentioned, that we should not ignore the internal drivers of shocks either. But I think among the economists, there's probably is a consensus on that. On the structural deficits that you mentioned, for example, the low tax GDP ratio or high concentration of export or the lack of new drivers of growth, I think there is a consensus. If you look at the the perspective plan of the government, 2041 vision or the 8 5-year plan, I don't think there is much to disagree with in terms of the aspirations that have been expressed and the strategies that have been proposed. So there is consensus on how do we respond to the structural issues, what sort of structural reforms are needed. But I think as far as the current crisis is concerned, I don't think there is a consensus. I think there are two types of views on that. One I would call the insider view, and probably in this audience, the only insider is Professor Shamsul. And the other is the outsider view, those of us who are watching things from outside the government. Now, when I say there is no consensus between the two, I think they differ both in terms of facts. Even if we do not have alternative sets of facts, we have alternative perception about facts. Same facts are interpreted differently by different groups. And Selim, you are one of the proponents of the alternative perceptions of inflation, for example. Now, and because we have alternative perception of facts, the policy recommendations obviously also differ. Now, the insider view, I think, is the following: that don't worry, be hopeful, if not happy. And why? Because the global conditions are improving, commodity prices are on a declining path. The dollar, which rose very rapidly last year, but for the last 3 months, 2-3 months, dollar has been on the decline. And you have seen the latest IMF report, World Economic Outlook, which says we are pessimistic, but we are less pessimistic than we were last October. Right? So the extent of pessimism has declined. And I think the insider view also is that we have adopted a comprehensive set of policies. And in fact, in the IMF program document, they recognize it. And these include administrative controls, rate caps, exchange rate caps, regulatory forbearance, liquidity support, refinancing facilities, administered price adjustments, subsidies and incentives. There is a whole list of things that we have done. And the view is that even if these have not cured the problem, they have been benign. They have not hurt anything. And so, but general perception of the insider view is that even if it hasn't worked so far, just have some patience, it will result going forward. So, as Dr. Adnan Mansur mentioned, that 2 months that never comes. Right? For last 6 months, we've been saying next 2 months it will be all right, but of course there are uncertainties everywhere. So it's not surprising that the 2 months is 50, but 2 months is yet to come. That's correct. But the insider view is that it will come. Now, on the opposite side, the outsider view. The outsider view is that yes, we would like to be hopeful, but we don't feel assured. We are looking for assurances on which the hope can be anchored. Why don't we feel assured? Well, we look at the indicators. We look at, the dollar shortage. Is it getting better or is it getting worse? Now, I give you one very powerful indicator that Bangladesh Bank has so far in first 7 months sold more than $9.2 billion, whereas last fiscal year, in 12 months, they sold $7.6 billion. So in 7 months, we have exceeded the amount that we unloaded in 12 months last year. So we can't say that the foreign exchange situation is getting better. Production, if you talk to the businessmen, you look at the newspapers every day, you hear complaints that production and investment are getting clogged because of inability to open LCs. We can't open even for machineries or intermediate inputs. We can't. There is growing deficit, which both Hassan Mansoor and Service mentioned in the financial account, which is something a reality. Last time we saw $1 billion deficit in financial account with the fiscal 11. Sometime ago. It's very rare in our history. Inflation is still high, maybe marginally declining. So when we look at the facts, we don't feel assured. Maybe the ground will give us some new assurances, but so far we don't have. Now, so the assumption that policy is working is not borne out by the facts. So I think the challenge here, which you at the end, your question was why, despite a lot of consensus, why is progress not happening? And I think I have a naive answer to that question, that somehow we are not able to bring to the, I would like to say political system, but lately I'm hearing the governance of the system is going away from politicians' control. So I have added political and administrative system. Dispassionate feedback on the reality, on what's happening. To bring it to the system and make them realize that we need to be very pragmatic on what's going on, recognize the facts, and do course corrections accordingly. And there, I think the billion-dollar question which you ended up with was who has interest and influence, who has influence but no interest. And I think I would join and end with what Dr. Rahman was saying, that it's not that they have, the influentials do not have interest. They do have interest in the extraction of wealth. No doubt about it. We all have interest in extracting wealth, but the question is, how do you do so? Now, one is through redistribution, which is through rent seeking, and the other is through creative destruction or through entrepreneurial efforts. And I think the problem lies there. There's nothing wrong with people having influence. People will have influence, and the influence will not be normally distributed across the population. But the thing is, what do you do with that? And that's where we could have a convergence of the interest of the influentials with wealth creation rather than through wealth redistribution through rent seeking. I think the economy can move forward. And that would answer your final question on this. How do we get growth going? And I just want to mention one last point is that we saw a World Bank country economic memorandum released last year, and basically they tried to identify where do we need to act to get growth going. And there we had 4 areas that need immediate attention. One is the trade reform, the other is the financial sector reform, third was urban reform, and the fourth was human resource development. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're quite efficiently managing our time. I think we would like to hear from the insider story of Rolo at the end. Before that, I think we would like to take some questions from the floor, and then also there are some questions online. So I think you can be very brief, and if you want to ask any question to the panelists, also please mention them later.
Your microphone down. Can you take the microphone here, please? Shani? One microphone to the front, please. Sure.
Oh, thank you. Not an icebreaker, but let me come to the point straight away. As part of building capacity for future resilience development and all, external shocks or even internal, is it the time to extend the remit of planning commission? Let me explain a little bit more. So far we talked about broad-based industry policy, weak institutions, collateral damages, unwarranted consequences, and all that. So there are two things I think we should be doing as a matter of code rather than an exception. One is, a regulatory impact statement. Whenever we're talking about a policy or reforming a policy, are we doing the due diligence in terms of engaging the stakeholders, doing all the benefits of the proposed reform or the policy? So that's one thing, regulatory impact statement. Second thing, planning commission doing a great job in terms of setting out our vision, aspirations, hopes, but what is lacking, I think, in terms of monitoring the policies, evaluating the policies, defining the policies, and identifying pragmatic way of implementing those policies. So for those things, I think there are a lot of think tanks doing all those things, but I suppose an independent, professional independent, statutory body like planning commissions can do a much better job, taking everybody in that. So I'm sort of posing the question to our honorable state minister: is it a time to expand the remits of planning commission through the regulatory impact statement, maybe we should check off that sort of activities, and so everybody, like bureaucracy and everybody, remains honest and on target. Thank you.
Will you take on 3 questions? Yes, please.
Hello, this is Amin Rustam. I work for BRAC. My question to the Honorable State Minister: why governance is going out of political control? Is it the lack of political will, or inefficient politicians have come to the rise?
My name is Yuddin. I'm an urban planner and specialize in regional economics. So my question is, when we look into the macroeconomic figures, lots of aggregate we see, and as we disintegrate the economy, we usually see that the economics actually work in terms of breaking the economic sectors. But because we work on space, we like to see how is the economy doing in terms of space. For instance, how is Dhaka doing, how is Shillong doing, and this kind of language. And because we are now having a shock from outside, it's also a way of looking into the domestic economy when we break down the economy in terms of space. Also that could be a blind spot because as we talk, we have learned to think in terms of export-led development, and before we had this import substitution approach. So now when we talk about resilience, can we also think in terms of how things were before we actually started to look into things in terms of globalization and stuff like that? Because resilience is more about what is happening inside the economy. So maybe we could think about it in that way as well.
Thank you.
Any other question? Hello, this is Dashram. I'm studying anthropology at the University of Dhaka. So thank you for this brave and critical conference so far. My question is to Mr. Selim Raihan. As we have discussed how Bangladesh has not transformed much in the last 20 years, what are SANEM's plan for the future, as SANEM has transformed a lot, and what are we expecting from SANEM in building resilience to shocks? Thank you.
Thank you. I think
Side to microphone. Good morning. I'm Professor Martha from IIT Kanpur, India. My question is, Bangladesh is going to achieve a status of a developing economy by 2026. But still you read in newspapers, and it was there in the TV, that it is going for the IMF program. I believe that things are different from what it is in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, where external debt is very high, electricity could be subsidized, and they have contracts which they cannot deny. So one wants to know, there was a statement yesterday that they are borrowing for Option. So I want to understand I want to understand why would Bangladesh need the low political chaos, transport and communication is developing, there's development work all around. So, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any female participant would like to pose a question? We need to have a gender balance. We can try. There's one face.
Thank you, sir. First of all, I think I was wondering, we are talking about priorities, challenge and shocks, and we are not, we don't have any female representative panel expert here. So Bangladesh is a country where the whole development is on the back of women. And I was like looking, who will say something about women, but I don't know, it was not a part of discussion. So I was thinking, if anybody can say anything, what is happening, because as the export was down, so what happened to those women? Because they were the managers of poverty. So what is happening now? Where those people are? So can you think any little bit about it and anything so that I will appreciate.
I think, thank you so much for the questions. I think I will request Dr. Hossein Dilrahman to talk about he has done a lot of work on the urban areas also, and also like the question on the urban empowerment and this issue, and then possibly I will request Dr. Hassan Mansoor or Mustafa Sir to talk about why did we take IMF loan.
Thank you. On the urban issue, yes, I think the space lens is a useful one to look at this economic growth issues. And it's an area where we really haven't been. The urban discourse is dominated by a planning discourse. I think the economic geography discourse is an important addition that Bangladesh needs to enter into. The potential for new sources of growth perhaps are lying outside of the metropolitan centers. And once we can get a better understanding of how the economic geography is currently at, then we can get some issue. At least we got one from the audience, if not in the panel, to raise the issue. You're absolutely right. Women are a critical part of the Bangladesh story, in every sense of the term. The growth story, the human transformation story, the resilience story also very much. And I think the point I was making about the awareness loss, I think the focus on women's issues needs to be also factored in as a upfront priority national issue. It's about their opportunity, for example, many people are out of the labor market, but the rate of return into the labor market, we need to see whether women are faring equally or less equally there. Also and I think World Bank and others, everyone has identified that the low participation, economic participation of women rate is a binding structural constraint in expediting our growth. So women's issue need to be looked at from both the point of view of economic transformation, but also the human development issue. But if you allow, I would like to I was provoked to by our talk and also to make a one point, which is that do you want to become influential? And we need to pose that question. Do economists want to become influential? I have some serious doubts there. Because we are comfortable with a certain way of projecting our analysis and its link up with policy. When Zahid, at the end of his intervention, mentions that the people with influence should get together. That's like a religious prayer. It's not a policy prescription. Allah to be correct and I could be the way. That's a religious prayer. That's not an analytical, and there is no example around the world such prayers have been answered on these matters. Other prayers, of course, have been answered in other matters. So what I'm for, since there are young people here, I think, and you have focused on data evidence, I think the power of evidence is what we need to focus on. Because at the end of the day, it's not just policy prescriptions that we should be looking for. It's does our analysis and evidence generation is creating that sort of a pressure. So we need to really ask ourselves, do we want to become influential?
Thank you. I think we will request our panelists to, briefly say few words in 1 minute.
Okay, I just want to touch 2 points. One is we know that women issues were not definitely explicitly touched in our deliberation. But one thing we must keep in mind, whenever a country goes through a shock, it is the women and the children that bears the most highest cost of that. So if you look at the COVID, for example, who lost most? It's the young women. The girls who dropped out of the school system and will never be able to get back to school. That's the permanent loss to the society and for them. So that's a huge number in Bangladesh. So women is very much protected through overall economic progress and so on. So that's, although it's not written, it's not said, but we must recognize that they are the beneficiary of this, of the recovery process and quicker recovery process. Second thing is that why Bangladesh came to IMF. The good thing is that Bangladesh came to IMF early on, rather than too late. Because the late it becomes, the more painful is that adjustment process. And everything said and done, I would say that even now, in the case of Bangladesh, we really, or inside policymakers wants to correct things, it can be done relatively easily and with a lesser pain. But if you wait, or had you waited longer, it would have been much more difficult adjustment. So, and the good thing that IMF also recognizes that, and they call this as preventive policy package, preventive program, not as a recovery program or a disaster recovery program. Things that we see of Pakistan. So we are fortunate in that sense that the governments proactively engaged with the IMF and put together a program. Now we are waiting to see whether they stick to the commitments made in the program, which are now well known to us, and the targets established, whether we can achieve that. If we can achieve that, then we should be slowly getting out of it. And there are certain issues that have not been recognized by the IMF. The issue of financial accounts issue, the issue they were too pessimistic about export, etc. But we can adjust for those things. The issue is that ultimately we have to turn around this economy, and I'm sure that the next consultation, the IMF and Bangladesh team will focus on areas which were not adequately addressed, and they will tighten the program adequately to make it much more workable and tuned to the situation of the country.
Thank you. Just to take on the last point made by Hassan Bhai, I think that one of the positive spin-offs from the IMF loan could be that some of the reforms that we have been talking about for many years, now under the IMF advisory or recommendations or conditionalities, whatever you say, we hopefully will be, undertaking those reforms and implementing those reforms. I have read our Honorable Minister's interview in the Pratham Alo this morning, and he was making the point that many of these reforms we have already started and we will be continuing. But we have seen that although we have in our 5-year plans, we have mentioned about those reforms, but those were not really being implemented to the extent that we should have. Fiscal reforms, to the banking sector reforms, one can go on and on. So if the IMF now comes, it has come up with those advisories or recommendations, and the first tranche has been disbursed, but the second, third, and fourth tranche of the loans, there will be 7 installments. Those will depend on what progress we have done. So at least something good may come out of that. With regard to the female, impact, I think it was very rightly mentioned. It is the women who, feel the pinch part. If it is high inflation, the women has to take where to spend the money, and we know that one of the major achievements in our country till now has been that they are aware about, for example, the need for education of the children. And the mother has to take the decision whether she will be able to send the child to the school or they will be working in the fields. So I think that that there is a very important gender aspect of coming out of the current problem. With regard to Dr. Helal's question, I think we have this IMED in the Planning Commission. Implementation, Monitoring, Evaluation Department of the Planning Commission, which is entrusted with the task of monitoring whether the money is well spent, etc., etc. So we don't need to expand the capacity of the ambit of the Planning Commission, but to really ensure that the institutions which are there, they perform their duties and they perform the task that they were set out to perform in the first place. So I think that is very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I just want to clarify one point that I think probably a bit misunderstood. I didn't mean to say that the influential should get together and all that to do good things. What I wanted to say is that the challenge is how do we incentivize the influentials to focus on wealth creation rather than wealth extraction from a fixed pie. That's that I was trying to pose as a challenge. And my naive answer to that question was that we need what Deng Xiaoping used to call adaptive governance. That is, which Hussein Rahman also emphasized at the end, is that you look at the policies, you look at the facts, what has happened, and based on the facts, you do course corrections. The second point what I wanted to make is on the, since there are no females here, that needs to be, I just want to give you one information on, we all pay lip service to the importance of female labor force participation. Nobody disagrees with that. The World Bank did a gender report about 4 years ago. And there they tried to identify the constraints on female labor force participation. And one of the constraints that was identified was that they have an excessive share of family. And one reason for that is that they have to take care of their children.
And so the solution that was proposed that why don't we have trustworthy daycare centers, particularly in the urban areas where educated females can go to work. So the initiative that the World Bank undertook was to support the preparation of the Daycare Act, because that would provide the legal basis for regulating the informal daycare centers that exist. There are many informal daycare centers in Dhaka city. The first draft of that Daycare Act was approved in principle by the cabinet in 2017. 2022 gone. We still haven't seen that Daycare Act being passed. Forget about the implementation and so on. It's hanging out there.
Is it because we don't have the capacity to do it? I don't think so. I mean, you just look at the recent reform that we did in the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission's power. We wanted to take it price-setting power away from the ERC and shift it to the Ministry of Energy. How long did it take? The cabinet took a decision. There was a presidential, we were in such a hurry that there was a presidential ordinance done. So that, the parliament was not sitting, so that, we can do the decision, and then when the parliament convened, the amendments was passed. So my point is, when we want to do a reform, we can do it. I mean, same goes for the election commission reform that we saw. 2 weeks time. But the Daycare Act, which is a very simple reform, I think it's very non-controversial kind of reform. But there is, again, influentials not having enough interest. Thank you.
Okay. We're now running out of time, and I think I will say there was a question for Sane, and also there is a chat box.
Thank you. I think I'll be very brief. There's a question in the chat box from Zoom, so I will pass that question to our Honorable State Minister. But before that, a clarification from Sane. Actually, for this panel, we approached two female economists from Bangladesh, but they were not available for today. So unfortunately, we couldn't have the gender balance for this session. But if you look at the agenda for the rest of the program, especially the technical sessions, you will see we try to maximize the gender balance as much as possible. And thank you for posing that question. I will talk about the question was asked about the SANEM's resilience, other things probably over the tea break bilaterally because we don't have much time here. But there's a question in the chat box. Mohammed Saifur Rahman, he asked this question: how are we moving towards sustainability when we are still focused on growth rather than economic resilience? I think we should also address the value of our powerful young generation in terms of employability, technical education, and self-driving opportunities. Those directly impact upon the national economy. I'll stop here.
I think now I will request the Honorable State Minister of Planning, Dr. Shamsul for his
A very good morning to all, and the Honorable Chair, Abdul Khandokar, and the keynote presenter in this session, Dr. Salim Rahan, and our luminary, all panelists at this session, and the very important audience we have now. And that topic is very much timely to talk to because we are passing very testing times, and Bangladesh will be facing challenges yet, though we have received IMF support and other supports we are receiving. So the issue of the shocks and shifts, sustaining development in a turbulent time, issues are very timely, and with these discussions and discourses in this session and the following sessions, we'll be able to know the challenges, the problems, the gray areas we'll be facing in the coming days. In that sense, Salam now, Salam's this event is, I should say, very much timely and will help us a lot to understand inner problems and the challenges, deep challenges we'll be facing. So I thank them very much for inviting me as chief guest here in this macroeconomic session. He discussed at length overall the macroeconomic challenges we will be facing, and his core theme I appreciate very much. The effects of the shocks depend on the resilience of the economy. So highlighting the resilience issue is very much, again, I think, cusp of the moment in facing the challenges in managing the macroeconomy, I should say, in particular. How you manage the economy over last 2.5 years during the COVID fallout and the latter part early this year. Last year we had Ukraine-Russia war, that two types of big shocks actually fallen on our economy and economies of the world. So how we performed and how we fared in managing the economy. Of course, I will provide insider view, as I'm the lone insider here and all are outsiders. So as Dr. Zahid, certainly I will give you insider's view plus, still I would say I'm hopeful and optimistic, and I would say don't worry that much as we hear the challenges, failure in governance in many areas, and we are not very much in time with the reforms as have been discussed here. And so the insider view, I would hold the view that still we fared very well during these challenging times. I will give statements based on facts and figures, and Dr. Zahid said data and figures one may interpret according to his need and according to his pursuit. So I think fact is fact, that I speak the truth. One can understand what it is being said in any fact or in any data set that cannot be denied. So what I will be talking about, I will talk based on facts and figures. So first of all, I would like to recapitulate where we are with some important macroeconomic indicators. And by this, I will give you a comparison of three large economies in South Asia, Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. This is from World Bank and IMF. So data certainly we can rely on, and what I will be saying is obvious. So per capita GDP US in US dollar, this IMF estimate for 2022, as the last available. Many of you know it, but still for other outsiders from the audience, I want to state this. Per capita income, 2,326 in 2022, during the COVID years. India, 2,312. Pakistan, 1,560. Gross debt to GDP ratio, this is figure of 21-22, covering 2 years, calendar years. Gross debt of Bangladesh, 32.4, India 89.6, Pakistan 83.6. So you see, while we say we are not in distress, particularly not debt distress, we are not saying the untrue thing. So IMF, World Bank, you can use the data. And access to electricity, more than 100, 99% India, Bangladesh 100, 99 India, Pakistan 75%. Female labor force participation in terms of gender, women participation in labor force. Female labor force percent of total labor force 36%, 36.3. India 20, Pakistan 20%. And life expectancy in years 2020 it is 73 Bangladesh, India 70, Pakistan 67. Adult literacy above 15 years of age, percent population. 75% Bangladesh literacy rate, 74 India, Pakistan 58. Infant mortality 24. Infant mortality per 100,000 live birth, infant less than 1 year child. So 24. India 27, Pakistan 54. And global gender gap index out of 156 countries. Bangladesh's rank is 65, India 140, Pakistan 153. Global hunger index, one of the important indicator for goal 2 target of SDGs. Global hunger index 76, India 101, Pakistan 150, Pakistan 92, India 101, Bangladesh 76. How about human development during the COVID period? Out of 189 countries, Bangladesh rank is 129, India 131, Pakistan 154. So what this data say, I hope while we say we are not so pessimistic, because you see our performance with macroeconomic indicators, with social indicators, we are in good shape, I should say. How to build economic resilience? Dr. Selim proposed certain, measures covering in different areas: broad-based economic growth, macroeconomic management, strengthening the social sector, strengthening the institutions. Economic skill, I should say, shows resilience as the important macroeconomic indicator show. Without the resilience, we could not be above India or Pakistan in social indicators or even economic indicators. So I should say our people are resilient in Bangladesh, and we need to be more resilient, no doubt, to make the economy more vibrating. I pick up his points because he gave a big, very broad paper covering all the economic areas. About very low tax GDP ratio, this is one of the gray area of our economy. Of course, we need to improve that. We are also lagging behind in tax effort also. I mean, potential tax collection and what we can collect. So in that sense, we are behind in South Asia, no doubt, in terms of tax effort also, which Selim has not covered. Anyway, if we consider tax effort, I mean, potential tax collection and what we collected. So that is the tax effort. So lagging behind in South Asia in terms of tax effort. So we are trying to cover up and increase the total revenue GDP ratio. So we are lagging behind. Are we doing enough for reaping the benefits of demographic dividend? Of course, no. Even if not enough, I think government has been doing a lot. For reaping the benefit of demographic dividend, road connectivity, expanded the highest. We have the highest road network in the world. I mean, per square kilometer, the highest paved roads in Bangladesh. So that, and with 100% electricity connection, and increased access in educational system, educational and health care. We know government instituted 17,000 community clinics have been in work now. You can have medical services, primary medical services from these health clinics. And in rural areas, actually, with this road connectivity, access to electricity, a lot of non-agricultural activity, non-farm activity, the door for non-equipment has opened quite a big. We have new growth centers, and Dr. Hossein Jillur said that there is a reverse migration from urban to rural areas. the one reason I should say there is no unemployment in rural areas because there's big depth of agricultural laborers. You can get day laborer very easily because there are a lot of job opportunities in the growth center and there's shopping and so many economic activity generated there and vehicles flying, many workshops opened in rural areas. So the reason for reverse migration is not that there's distress in urban areas. Actually, they are motivated to go for job searching in rural areas. I should say that's the way the economy is functioning. So, in terms of exploiting demographic dividend, government opened up until 43 government universities. We allowed 104 private universities to go in, and so many private institutions, medical colleges, have been opened, and that's why we created a lot of opportunity for exploiting our demographic dividend, employing our young generation. I have a point to say, particularly when we show public expenditure on education as % of GDP. Nowadays, expenditure on education should comprise of both public and private, expenditures. Only government expenditure is low, no doubt, but we allow private sector to come up with educational facilities. So if you combine these both, then our expenditure on education will go up as a share of GDP. So we need to take account of the private expenditure on education system, even in health expenditure. We need to take account of private initiatives. That will give the correct picture. Otherwise, it will show always a lower figure. This is true for also expenditure, public expenditure on health as % of GDP. It has been quite low, no doubt. It's only above, a little above Cameroon, Bangladesh. But this is on the public expenditure. But what about the private expenditure on health facilities? So many hospitals in the private sector working in Ubujala level, in city areas, in municipalities. That need to be taken also account while you talk about public, while you talk about expenditure on health as a % of GDP. Otherwise, this will mislead the exact situations. The other one I want to talk about, 5-year plans of government endorses the need for reforms. Well, that is true. We have undertaken so many reforms going on in the public arena, in employment. We have withdrawn the quota system for all first-class jobs. This has been one of the big reforms in public administration, I should say. And to speed up reforms, initiative should come from political arena. That is very much true. I believe that should come from a political arena. But some say that government actually losing political control and because taking over the political control of the country. I think this may not be said in so straight way because the ultimate leadership is with politician. I mean, at the hand of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she is politician altogether from her to head, number one. Number two, while Parliament is functioning, how we can say so, while this government instituted Jala Parishad and Jala Parishad is functioning well, they are elected representative. And Upajala system has been restored by this government. So they are working. So there are the regular elections on the local government. So how can we say the political leadership is losing control. I think this may not be taken, as it is said. Dominance of another thing, dominance of parliamentarian members from business profession. Of course, they are politicians. I mean, how to increase share of representation from other segments of the civil society or profession that need to be resolved in the development bargain in the society. I mean, parliament is dominated by, parliament is composed of politicians, no doubt that, and in, of course, business committee dominate coming from business profession, and how they can be more represented in the civil society, that may be thought of. While little progress, he raised a question at the end of his paper, reform has some groups, and there is resistance. So little progress, if any, actually, we need to be made Parliament more functional and more accountable about that. And lastly, I would say, as I said, I'm always optimistic, as the data say. I mean, I hope you will agree with me about the remittance. About the remittance, if I compare this year's, I mean, this and last year, with the previous 6 months, I mean, previous year, what is the situation remittance receiving? You see, remittance receipt has increased this last 6 months. I mean, July to December. I have the data on that. So this year we received 10.49 billion US dollar, and we received 10.23 billion in the previous year on the same period, July, December. So remittance has not fallen. Other thing is reserve. Of course, reserve has fallen. It was 45.15 billion, and it has come down to 32.29 billion. And the reasons and all this debacle, we talked at length here and in press, we know the causes. About export, what is the export situation? It's very much important. So one of the growth drivers is export. So July, December export figure is we earned 27.31 billion. And the same period, the year before, 24.69 billion. So export figure has risen, you see, almost around 3 billion US dollar. So how about import? Import, actually, if I say import figure, during the July, November, I don't have the December figure. So I will compare the same period in the last year also in that way. 35.15 billion, July, December, the last, and the year before, this was 33.68 billion import figure. That means import has increased in a big way, but mind that consumption items we actually restricted to bring, and we import higher taxes, import taxes on luxurious items. Even then, this higher figure indicate that import for raw materials and industrial inputs have not actually reduced. So that is good for the economy, I think. Though we had efforts to reduce total import figure because of the reserve instability. How about LC opening? We hear about many things about LC opening. LC opening has reduced, and this July-December figure was 34.10 billion, and last year before 44.01. That means LC opening has fallen, and because of restriction on importing luxury items and other consumption items, those which are not very much necessary. And foreign direct investment is important indicator that has not fallen over the last year, though the amount is not very big, but it has been in that way. This year, July, November, we received $905 million. Last year, it was, the year before, it was 870 million. This year, 905 million. So broad money circulation, depending on the financial sector, it says this year, this has increased 8.61% increase over the same period last year. The figure is quite big, 70,404, 17 something crore. Anyway, in percentage, I can tell you 8.61% increase over the last year. So broad money supply has increased. Domestic credit, another good indicator to understand the functioning of private sector and government role in domestic credit. Domestic credit is in crore taka. Government borrowed more money this year, that is 15.79% over the last year. Last year it was 12%. How about the private sector credit growth? Private sector credit growth this year has been 13.97% over the last year. Last year, the figure was 10.11%, 10.11. This year, 13.97, almost 14% increase private sector credit. That means business activities, economic activities are going, I should say, in full swing, if I say in that. About the revenue, NPR tax revenue, this is not so encouraging. I said this is the only one gray area for us in economic management. The growth is 13.80% July, November this, and last year 16.46. I mean, we could not cover up the last year figure even. So about what we can understand from these figures, as I will hold on saying, we can be hopeful, but of course there are challenges, no doubt, and economy has not fallen in debt trap, number one, because we are not debt distressed country. Our debt GDP ratio is still quite in the comfort zone. Our debt GDP ratio is 42%, both domestic and external, combining both 42%. Debt GDP ratio actually does not mean one country has fallen in trap. Otherwise, even in good time, countries borrow. You see Singapore, their debt GDP ratio 141%. Japan 266%. It's for 2022 figure. South Korea 47% debt GDP ratio. India 84%. Pakistan 78%. Sri Lanka 119%. Bangladesh 42%. If I talk about only about external debt, only 17%. So we can go up to 40% of foreign borrowing. So we are in very comfort zone. So we need not be very much worried about we are taking loans. I think we can go a further way if we can improve our implementation capacity, if we can increase our efficiency in expenditure management. Then we need to go further with foreign borrowing. I hope this view. And with all these facts, figures, I should say, again, I would say as insider, as you say me, of course, I would say we are hopeful, and certainly I hope you also nothing to be discouraged. Economy will come up, no doubt, but matter of 1, 2, 3 months, still things are coming up. Because in agriculture sector, our production everywhere, for every figures actually going up. Agricultural productivity and total production figures actually have been increasing. Industrial production is going well. Around 12% growth rate we have in industrial sector. So our internal economy, I think, don't see any sort of very much facing that of Sri Lanka or Pakistan situation, that would not be possible. Because all this has happened because of our resilience, our economic management, even with all this criticism, we are not undertaking reforms as we should, but we are implementing, we have undertaken many of the reforms by this time, and we will be continuing with our reforms, certainly. And one good thing is I have come up with their loan money. They actually mostly provide support for when a country actually faces problem with balance of payment problem. So we had some problem balance of payment over the last 2-3 years that has been being eroded. So this time, this is very timely, and this will indicate that other multilateral agencies would also come forward to support us. AIB also expressed, Senior Vice President last 2 weeks ago came, I talked with him, and $2.5 billion they will be ready to, they are ready to provide support to Bangladesh. So all the World Bank, IMF, and other multilateral agencies, even bilateral, our lending bilateral countries, particularly Japan, is with more support this time with us. They are supporting our, budget support this time. So things are on good course, I should say, but we need to be more careful. We need to be more, more transparent, certainly in public spending. And Bangladesh is doing well, given all the challenges, both from outside or from home front, whatever we say. And I think another question you raised to me, I don't know, I forgot. Political control in governance, I already say this is not so true as we see the institutions are functioning. Maybe there are, not up to that much as we expect, but political control is there certainly. Who is running the country, who is in stewardship, she is a pure politician. So certainly bureaucracy. Now the bureaucracy more pro-development than before. They are more, I should say, trained now than before. They are more, I think, really they are with appointment, with the training, with the exposure to foreign countries. They are more, I think, pro people nowadays. So we must work together, bureaucrats and politicians. There is no rivalry. There should not be any rivalry. So long parliament is functioning, the political control will not be lost. So lastly, I should say, I would take the words from Stephen Darkon. As I said, I am very hopeful, always I am optimistic, and still I believe we can manage things very well. Nothing to be so worried. I borrow the words from Stephen Darkon, the book, Gambling on Development, Why Some Countries Win and Others Lose. This book came in last March, when there was Ukraine-Russia war and when we are in with fallout of COVID. And he wrote a chapter on Bangladesh. The chapter name is Bangladesh, the Bengal Tiger Cub. The book is very interesting and discusses many other countries with the in present days situation. In the chapter last sentence, I believe is a Oxford professor, and he served once DFID, DFID, a chief economist, and now he works with Oxford University. He said, last sentence, maybe Bangladesh will continue to surprise more in future. So that is true. Why he is so confident? Because he analyzed every macroeconomic macro indicators concerning Bangladesh governance issues he dealt with in detail in his book. So with these few words, I want to stop here. And I again thank Sanam, this very timely effort arranging this very important seminar, and the views, the suggestions you will come up with. Certainly we will look for carefully what you are saying, and where possible, certainly we'll try to follow your recommendations if that is, that helps our economic, that helps improving our economic function. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable State Minister of Planning. Ending the session with a very optimistic note backed by statistics. I think we started the session with less pessimistic notes where our managers have identified the sorts of shocks and also the types of shocks, and I tried to provide a suggestion in terms of what could be done or what could be done in terms of. I think from the panelists it was clear that we should try to take the first base policy, the less costly. But sometimes we are taking policies which are actually very costly. I think we also need to understand the cost of those policies that we are taking. I think with the optimistic note, we'd like to all of you to invite to the tea. Please, the tea session will be 15 minutes, and please come back here within 15 minutes. Thank you.